Hello, everyone. Boy, you are in for a treat. You can see I have my dear friend, Dr. Gabor Maté, highly esteemed physician who has spent over 20 years working with people in family practice and palliative care. He is so well known, he doesn't even need an introduction, but I have called him here because of his highly specialized expertise in human development, stress, addiction, and trauma. We are here today going to focus on this amazing book called The Myth of Normal. Welcome, welcome, Dr. Gabor.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you. So let's just start with, why do we call it the myth of normal? And what do you mean by that?
Sure. So normal usually means something that we're used to, that seems natural. And so in medicine, when we talk about normal temperature, we talk about a range of temperature of the body. Within that range, life is possible and healthy. But if the temperature is too low or too high, we get sick or we actually die. So normal means natural and healthy. Now, we assume that what we're used to in this society, what we consider normal, is also healthy and natural. The argument I'm making is that in this culture, the way we're living is neither healthy or natural, so that what is normal or what is considered normal in our culture is actually completely abnormal when it comes to human needs and human health. And this applies to just about every aspect of life, beginning with how we birth children, how we raise children, and everything else. So what I'm saying is that the normal is actually very abnormal.
Right. I talk about it when I give my speeches as this matrix, this bubble we're living in, like the fish in water, and we don't even realize what that water is. And we can't even call it water because the fish doesn't understand. So similarly, we are surrounded, permeated by very toxic institutions, ways of being. You and I work with parents quite a lot. Sometimes I have to even defend co-sleeping with an infant. I have to defend picking up the infant when the infant is crying, because what has become normal now in these industrialized ways of being is that apparently you can spoil an infant, and to undo those belief systems then becomes a huge treatise, when these should have been the most natural, beautiful ways of treating our children. So from sleep development to how we eat, all the processed food, to how stressed and anxious we are, how disconnected from nature, we live in this, what you call in the book, a toxic culture. So
yeah, so when it comes to picking up children, so when you look at how human beings evolved in small band hunter-gatherer groups and indigenous groups, they always picked up their kids. And when the Europeans came to North America, they found it strange that the indigenous people never put their kids down. They always picked them up and they slept with them. Now, if you look at animals, mammals, they never put their kids down. And if the kid is distressed, or the infant is distressed, the mother immediately picks them up. So that's what's natural and healthy. In this society, it's become abnormal to pick your kids up when they're crying. And Dr. Spock, who was a parenting guru to generations,
right,
actually talked about the tyranny of the infant who wants to be picked up.
right,
Now,
right.
when you don't pick up the kid, as I point out in this book, that actually gives the child a message that they don't matter, that their feelings don't matter, and that they're not important. And what you're also doing is the child needs to be picked up because they need the connection emotionally. When you don't pick them up, their brains are filled with cortisol, and the stress hormone that interferes with healthy brain development. And
Yes.
yet, that's considered totally normal in this society to stress our kids.
Right. And then talk about the mother, right? And I'm talking about the mother as a female, but it could be any caregiver. But
Yeah.
let's focus on that bond that the mother, she had the baby within her, if it was biological. She
Yeah.
has this bond, she has oxytocin. This is in the female body. And then we're really training the mother to go against her instinct to nurture and caretake. You know, that divine feminine in the woman especially comes through in the mother child bond, and we're breaking that. So now the mother is abnormal and going against her instinct. She feels her own cortisol levels rise when the baby cries.
Yeah.
And we want to run to protect, but we're being told that that is abnormal. So look at how distorted it all starts. And when it starts so early, like you talk about in this amazing book, The Myth of Normal, how this sets us up for all a cascade of disease. Can you talk about how that brain with the stress hormone, you talked about asthma,
Yeah.
autoimmune diseases, how does that affect the infant growing development?
So first of all, this process begins already before birth,
Yes.
because we know now from many studies that already the emotional states of the mother during pregnancy, and I have a whole chapter on that in this book, emotional states of the mother during pregnancy affect the brain development of the child. And so that we don't look after pregnant women very well in this culture. They often have to work under stressful conditions. The doctors are not trained to ask them about their emotional health. When people came to me for prenatal care, based on my training, I never asked them about how they're doing emotionally. And yet that has a lot to do with how the brain develops inside the uterus. Then there's the birth practices, which you mentioned oxytocin. So in British Columbia, where I live, there's a nearly 40% cesarean section rate. Now,
Right.
now C-sections can be life-saving for mother and infant about 10 to 15% of the time. But they have a C-section rate close to 40% or even higher in many areas of North America and the developed world, is to interfere with the natural process. Nature actually has prepared what's called a love cocktail of oxytocin and endorphins and vasopressin that the mother and the baby both share during the birth, and that helps their bonding. When that is interfered with, that bonding is right away impaired right from the beginning.
Yes.
Now, then comes what you mentioned about the mother's own instincts. We do have parenting instincts. There's circuits in our brains that are designed for caring for infants and for caring for each other. But those circuits need the right environment to be evoked. They don't automatically come online. So the environment has to support them. Now, when parents sleep train their babies, when you speak to the parents, what's happening for you when your baby is screaming to be picked up and you're not, their heart is breaking. They
Yes.
tell you. And then mothers have, I've been told by mothers too, they said they went to the shower and put the shower on full blast and stop their ears so they won't hear their babies crying because their heart is just aching so. But they have to learn to ignore their instincts.
Right.
When they ignore their instinct, that's going to have an impact on their whole parenting afterwards.
Right. Right.
So now then we come to stress in infancy. We know that, for example, trauma in childhood increases the risk of all matter of physical health conditions: asthma, autoimmune disease, malignancy, depression, anxiety, psychosis, everything. Why? Because you can't separate the mind from the body. And when we mess with children's emotions in childhood, when we don't meet their needs, not even if you just abuse them, but just if you don't meet their needs, that changes the child's physiology. And it also, when the child's needs aren't met automatically by the parent, then the child has to work to get the parent to meet their needs. As soon as the child has to work to get their needs met, they develop this attitude that I'm not lovable, that I have to earn the right to exist. And then they spend the rest of their lives trying to justify their existence, which is
Yes.
very stressful. And
Yes.
that can trigger all kinds of illnesses. The science of it is very elegant, very simple, very elegant, and it's outlined in my book. In terms of what you said about spoiling children, just a final comment, there was an interesting study that was done where they looked at mothers interacting with their infants, and thousands or many hundreds of mothers. And most mothers interacted really well with their kids. Some, a small minority, because their own trauma, they didn't. And a small minority were what they call, I don't know, super moms, I don't know what they call them, but these mothers doted on their infants. They gave them extra attention, extra love, extra connection. 30 years later, when I look at the mental health of these children, the healthiest ones, the ones that were, quote, over mothered. In other words, the ones who got, I'm not talking about helicopter parenting, by the way. I'm talking about the quality of the emotional connection. And the kids that got the best emotional connection, these super moms, they were the healthiest in their 30s. And the
Yes,
researchers concluded you can't spoil babies.
you
It's not
cannot.
possible. It's not possible to spoil a baby.
Yeah.
And they also said that we have to do more based on this research. We have to do more to protect the parent-child relationship. And I thought to myself, boy, a culture where study has to be done that calls for protecting
I know.
the most necessary relationship in our whole lives, that's a culture in trouble.
Yes, yes. And that's why I began doing this work, because I would see in adult client after client that the source of the disconnect wasn't anything in their present life,
Yeah.
but it started, the inception was the disconnection in their early childhood bonds. And when that attachment, not over attachment, not over indulgence, not helicoptering, we're talking about, as you said, the quality of the emotional bond is severed, is distorted, it sets up a cascade that is irreplaceable. Sure, you can heal and recover, but you spend a lot of effort in your adult life. You have to break down. So I talk about it, that the child's true self is never seen for what it is. And your point that trauma, and we'll talk about what trauma is, people think it's only the bad things that happen to you, but as you outline, and I want to highlight, it's not just the bad things that happen to you, but all the good things that didn't happen,
That's
all
right.
the seeing, witnessing, soothing. And that's what my next book, The Parenting Map, really emphasizes to parents. This is how you empathize. This is how you validate. This is how you stay still and be present. Because we don't know how to do that. We've been so severed ourselves from ourselves. We're disconnected within. So trauma, you say, is not something that happens to you. It is
Well,
something that happens within you. So
it,
talk about that.
yeah. So I tell you something. If parents really understood the message, for example, in your new book and in your conscious parenting, I tell you as a physician that my business would dry up
Mhm.
because so many of the conditions that I saw in adulthood, whether mental health or physical health, had to do with children's needs not having been met in child because the parents in this culture not knowing, not being connected to their instincts enough, and the conditions are being so stressful on parents that they can't provide children with those essential needs. So,
Yes.
so yeah, you're quite right. Trauma comes from a word called wounding or wound. It's a Greek word. Now, you can wound kids in two ways. You can do bad things to them: physical, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or circumstances that are really difficult, like a parent dying or a harsh divorce, or parent being addicted or mentally ill or jailed, or neglect. You and I have both seen in adults the impacts of these experiences. But since trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you. It's the wound that you sustain, which has long-term effects. So that clearly you can wound kids in two ways. You can do bad things to them, including, I have to say, racism and poverty as well. Or you can wound kids by not meeting their needs. And this is what we call the small t traumas. And small t traumas is when the child's needs for unconditional loving acceptance is not met. When, as you mentioned, the child is not seen and not heard for who they are, not accepted for who they are. When the child has to work to make the relationship work. When the child is not permitted or allowed to experience all their emotions. Now, the child's brain, like the brain of all animals, all mammals, has got circuits for anger, for joy, for love, for curiosity, for grief. And children, when they get the message that certain emotions are not acceptable, they will suppress those emotions for the sake of being accepted by the parents. Now, when they suppress those emotions, because of the mind body unity, you see, here's the science of it, is that the mind is inseparable from the body. So the emotional system is not a separate system from our immune apparatus, from the hormones, or from the nervous system. It's all one. The science that studies the unity of all these systems is called psychoneuroimmunology. And again, we know now that you can't separate the emotions from the nervous system, the immune system, or the hormones, or from the gut, or from the heart. Now, that also means when kids are taught that some emotions are not acceptable, they will suppress those emotions unconsciously for the sake of being accepted by the parents. And the suppressing those emotions will mess with their nervous system, their hormones, and their immune system. And so a lot of the people that develop chronic illness in adulthood, autoimmune disease and malignancy, were people who actually had to suppress themselves in childhood, either because of overt abuse, and there's a huge relationship between childhood trauma and adult illness documented in the literature, although the average doctor never hears this information. That's a whole other subject. But also just by suppressing their emotions. So all the people that I treated with autoimmune disease, by the way, which are mostly women, I mean, 70-80% of people with autoimmune disease, like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, are women. Why? Because in this culture, it's women who are taught to suppress their anger and to suppress their emotions for the sake of looking after everybody else. And
Yes,
it's not a biological thing. It becomes biological, but
yes.
it doesn't begin with the biology. There's nothing biologically in women that would make them suppress their feelings. But they're
Wow.
trained, just to say certain black people are not allowed to be angry. So
Sure.
they have more high blood pressure, they have more autoimmune disease, more everything. And
Right.
women generally are trained to suppress their emotions for the sake of taking care of everybody else. Let me tell you one study. This is in the States. They looked at 2,000 women over 10 years. Over a 10-year period, those women that were unhappily married and didn't express their feelings were 4 times as likely to die as those women who were unhappily married and did express their feelings. So the issue wasn't pure happiness or unhappiness, it was the freedom or the lack of it to be emotionally expressive, you know,
Yeah.
that
So
kills.
powerful. So
Yes,
powerful. And we underestimate the power of that bond. And I often tell my parents, more than teaching them to ski and more than training them to be athletes or get good grades, focus on the quality of their childhood. We have lost our children's childhood. We've taken it off the map as if it's an incidental step on the way to adulthood. And you and I know that it is the most sacred phase of life. And childhood has such magic and awe, but its primary ingredient is the freedom of the child to explore itself. And we've begun to suppress that. So, in your book, you talk about how big T trauma and small t are really on a spectrum. So
yes,
people don't have to identify necessarily who did what, when did it happen, because it's not even related to the external. It's about your internal response. And if we look at it on a spectrum, we can let go of the identifying elements but focus on the experiential elements.
exactly. And, usually I have to talk to somebody for 5 minutes so I can pretty much tell what happened to them in childhood, even without asking any questions about their childhood, just by how they feel about themselves and what they show and their body language and their tone of voice. We carry all this information, we're not even aware of it. And many people, myself included, for a long time, we're like puppets on a string, and the strings are pulled by our unconscious and unconscious wounds and traumas. And later we think we're free, but actually we fall in kind of a program we're not even aware of.
Mhm.
No, there's another aspect. So much of liberation and healing is actually to getting conscious of
Yeah.
what's really driving us. And it does take a long time. Certainly in my case, it's taken a long time. There's one other aspect of childhood that we need to mention here, which is this.
Mhm.
Um, the digital media.
Mhm.
Now, I talk about this in my book, and there's a new book that just came out 2 weeks ago that shows how the digital corporations, the phone companies, they hire neuroscientists to figure out how to get at the most addictively vulnerable circuits of a child's brain. So these things are designed to be addictive. And one of the essential needs of children is free, spontaneous play out in nature.
Yes.
We've
Yes.
taken that away from kids. Kids
Yeah.
are given iPads and iPhones at
Yeah.
1 year of age.
Yeah.
Mothers are changing diapers and they're soothing the kid, but the kid is holding a cell phone in their
Yes.
hand.
Yes.
It used to be that the mother would talk and murmur and laugh and sing to the baby. When I say the mother, I don't care
Yeah.
what gender, as you said.
Yeah.
Um, but now it's been replaced by technology. Kids no longer know how to play spontaneously, creatively, freely. Their games are pre-programmed for them. They're designed to be addictive. And there's actually studies that show that the more digital media a kid uses, the more that interferes with the healthy brain development.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that in so many ways, I mean, there's a chapter in the book called The Sabotage of Childhood. We're literally sabotaging our children's childhood
Yes.
unconsciously. And while parents may feel, yeah, I'm so stressed, I'm busy, and it's so nice to have the TV set or the computer or the cell phone or the iPad to babysit my child, I can understand that kind of weariness and that desperation to get a break. But boy, we're damaging our kids.
It is so precipitous and
Yeah,
so pernicious of this invasion of technology. I personally shudder, and I give new parents who come to me a rule. I go, very minimal screens till teens. At least stop it till teens. After teens, they'll be assaulted by culture. And the TV, I look at it as benevolent now compared to these portable devices, which
yeah,
are programmed. Those cartoons look so, I'm like, watch as much Tom and Jerry. That's better. But what it is doing again is not providing the needs that the parent caregiver dynamic needs to provide. I have a course on screen addiction, and I talk about the 5 S's that the screens are now being the surrogate to provide: the need to be safe, seen, soothed, successful, significant. These needs were provided by the caregivers.
yeah.
Now it's technology, which is completely not interactive, interpersonal, no mirroring, no reciprocity. And so it's really depersonalizing. So we not only were always disconnected, you and I grew up with parents disconnected, stressed
Yeah.
out, sure, but now it's become on a steroid level of exponential proportions, where it is completely robotic and programmed. The needs to be seen and secure are programmed. They're not real, they're not organic. So our children, even now, less know how to interact even with a flower, leave alone with a human being.
And that's why they're so addictive because temporarily they give you that hit, but they don't really satisfy. So you need to have more and more of it all the time.
More and more.
I totally agree with you. In fact, if I was raising kids now, I'd say no screens at all.
Yeah, no screens at all.
Except maybe a TV set that we would choose and we watch together.
Yes, and
But I
that's why
would,
TVs were so good, right? They were out in the public space. At least we could
yeah,
all be in the room.
yeah,
Now they're just this,
yeah,
and it's
yeah.
become so dangerous. And don't you want to scream at the world, especially young parents, and tell them,
Oh,
don't
yeah.
do this, don't do it.
When I'm walking in the street
Yes,
and I see a young mom or dad
yes,
pushing a baby in a tram, and
I
the
know.
and the I think, my God, I'm gonna go to them. You poor, I can't because people would resent it and they would think it's
Yes,
weird. But I just
yes,
want to shout at them, please, do you
yes,
not realize what you're doing?
yes.
Your child
Yes.
needs to be looking into your eyes.
Yes, yes. I realize, and because we are caregivers ourselves, you and I, it's intolerable, the
Yeah,
trauma I can see happening. And I tell my daughter, who's 20, and she was on the like last few years of before childhood was invaded, so she had
right.
a childhood,
Yeah,
but then was abducted by the technology. And I tell her, you have to really think hard before you have a child, because this is now no joke. You are now an addict and you don't even know you are. And I will not let you raise a child in this robotic fashion, because you're not capable of even being connected to yourself. I'm so worried that she's going to have a child. But anyway, coming back to the topic of dissociation, everywhere where before we were dissociated enough, your
yeah,
generation, my generation had enough dissociation. Now, Gabor, it is beyond uh, it's beyond any healthy index. It is all unhealthy to me.
yeah,
And you talk about in your book how ADHD is on the rise, and how we think ADHD is inherited, or culturally or internally induced, and you talk about it being a coping mechanism. So our children are more addicted as a coping mechanism. So let's talk about ADHD and addiction as a stress response and a coping.
Well, if I may, I happen to have the first book I ever wrote was on ADHD. This is when I was first diagnosed with it in my 50s. And it's this book here. It's called Scattered Minds. And it when I was diagnosed, I thought, okay, now I can explain why I'm always tuning out and I have poor impulse control and I lose things and I'm so disorganized, you know. Well, so it felt like a relief to get the diagnosis. But I soon figured out that number one, the diagnosis, actually, I didn't soon figure it out. This I only understood more recently. The diagnosis doesn't explain anything. It describes something. No diagnosis ever explains anything.
Right, right.
It describes something. So, for example, Gabor has ADHD. How do we know? Because he tunes out and he's got poor impulse control. Why does he tune out and have poor impulse control? Because he's got ADHD. How do we know he's got ADHD? Because he tunes out and he's got poor impulse
Right,
control.
right,
You know, or even depression.
right.
So and so is depressed. How do we know? So and so has depression. How do we know? Because they have a low mood and they're socially isolating. Why do they have a low mood and are socially isolating? Because they have depression. How do we know they have depression? So these diagnoses don't explain anything. They describe something, but the explanation lies in human experience. So
Yes.
as I pointed out in Scattered Minds, and I pointed again in The Myth of Normal, the tuning out of ADHD is not a disease, inherited or otherwise. What it is, it's a coping mechanism. When a small child is stressed because the parents are stressed, it's not because the parents don't love them or don't do their best. When the parents are stressed, the child is stressed. You can tell how stressed the parents are by measuring the child's stress hormone levels.
Wow.
You know, now when a child is stressed, if you and I were stressed, if we're conscious adults, we can leave the situation or change the situation. The child can't do that. A
Yes.
6-month-old, a 2-year-old can't do that. What do? Excuse me. Their brains dissociate.
Mm-hmm.
They tune out.
Mm-hmm.
But when is this happening? This is happening when the brain is developing. And the
Mm-hmm.
human brain, we now know, according to the latest brain science, develops in interaction with the emotional environment. When the emotional environment is stressed, the child is stressed, and the circuits of attention and impulse regulation don't develop very well because the child, in order to survive, tunes out, not to
Sure.
be overstressed. So what we call later on a disease begins as a coping mechanism.
Right.
And
Right.
and if you look at why are more and more kids being diagnosed and medicated,
Right.
it's because the parenting environment and the culture has become so stressful for parents and for
Yes.
children that tuning out becomes like the default option of the
Yes.
child's brain. That's why, you know, genes don't change in 10, 20, 30 years. If we're seeing a lot more kids with anxiety and depression and self-cutting and suicidal ideation, the number of kids killing themselves is going up all the time in the United States. These aren't genetic diseases. These are, as I point out, normal responses to an abnormal situation.
100%. My co-author and I, in one of the books, it's called Superpowered, How to Cope with Anxiety. And the first thing it was a book for kids. We taught kids that your anxiety is the most normal response
Yeah,
to the insane culture. Don't take it personally, but now you have to have a relationship with it
yeah,
and learn to manage it. So dissociation is everywhere, and ADHD is a tuning out and a way to cope with the overwhelming stress. And so is addiction. Addiction is actually, as you've said, more than anyone I've ever heard, is a quest for connection. It's a quest to replace what was lost, but you're searching in the wrong places, right? You're searching it in the bottle or the substance. So many victims of more big T traumas like physical or sexual abuse talk about extreme levels of dissociations where the body is now disconnected from, right? So many
yeah.
people don't even know they have an illness. They're so misattuned to their feelings. So let's talk about the key qualities of your experience when you have trauma. You talk about six main things that happen. If we can touch on each one, I'm just going to list them and then we'll talk about each one.
Sure.
It's one, it splits us off from our gut feelings. So we have no idea when to say yes, when to say no. Number two, it limits response flexibility. Number three, it fosters a shame-based view of self, which can sometimes look like shameless narcissism as well. I love
That's
that.
right.
The shame can lead to shameless narcissism. Number
Yeah.
four, it distorts our view of the world. No, number five, it distorts our view of the world. And number six, it alienates us from the present. Now, actually,
Yeah.
there are five. Splits us from gut feelings, limits response flexibility, shame-based view of the world, distorts our view of the self, alienates us from the present. So take anyone and let's talk about that.
Well, let's take the gut feelings. Often when I give talks to an audience, hundreds or people or 1,000 people, I will ask them, if you ever had the experience of having a strong gut feeling about something, not following it, and then being sorry afterwards, just raise your hand. Well,
Yes.
just about everybody in the room will raise their hands.
Yes.
Now, that's because gut feelings are not luxuries. They're essential guides for survival.
Mhm.
We evolved out there in nature. How long does anybody survive? How long does any creature in nature survive if they're not in touch with their gut feelings and if they don't follow them? So gut feelings are essential for survival. You've never met a one-day-old baby. You've never met a healthy baby who's not in touch with their gut feelings.
Yeah.
You hear about it. So something happens between infancy and adulthood that splits us off from our gut feelings. That's something is trauma. And that's something, and what happens is you might be suffering in an environment, you might be angry, you might be fearful, but you don't have the freedom to express it because then your parents won't like you. They won't accept you. So now you have a unconscious decision to make. Do I pay attention to my gut emotions here? Or do I stay connected to my parents?
Yes.
Well, it's not a contest.
Yes.
The child can't afford, because, let's say a child is being abused, to take an extreme example. Their impulse is to run away.
Right.
Or fight back. Can they?
Right.
So they have to separate from the gut feeling. Now, you've just lost your guide to survival. And you get into all kinds of situations where it may not be so good for you, but you're not listening to your gut feelings. If you even feel them, you ignore them. So that's the first one, separation from gut feelings. Shefali, what was the second one? I don't keep these on my...
I'm going to read them out. Limits response flexibility.
Okay, let me talk about that. So response flexibility means that something happens, something potentially upsetting happens, but you're present to yourself and you're an adult and you can choose how you're going to respond. And that is the job of the mid-frontal cortex, this part of the brain here. That's where reflex flexibility lies. If something happens and you respond automatically, like you're triggered and you respond automatically, you don't have any flexibility. So let's say somebody cuts ahead of you in a line at the supermarket. You have response flexibility. If you're grounded, you can say, excuse me, do you realize that you're standing in front of me when I was here in line before? Right. Or you can say, oh, listen, maybe you're in a hurry, please go ahead. Or whatever. But if you don't have response flexibility, you're going to get triggered and you're going to be really angry and resentful and suppress it, or you're going to act it out.
Right.
And you're going to create a scene either inside yourself or outside yourself.
Yes.
Now, trauma interferes with the development of the midfrontal cortex.
Yes.
So we don't have response flexibility. So in a relationship, like in the first chapter of the book, I talk about my wife promising to pick me up at the airport and she's not there. Right. I had no response flexibility and I responded like an abandoned infant. Right. So trauma reduces or deprives us of response flexibility. Right. The third
I always tell parents, what is in your toolbox? And we open the toolbox and we're like, oh, you just have anger. And many people, just because that's the most highly protective against volatility from childhood, right? So they've developed volatility as their instinct, aggression as their defense. and I show them how they only have one tool. And that's what you're talking about. There's no
Yeah,
variability,
that's right.
there's no spontaneity, no creativity, no pause. It's just attack, right? And so we have to realize the more the aggression, the more that child was bearing all this suppressed rage. And now as adults, it's all coming out like a volcano.
And
The
by
third,
the way,
yeah,
these are the people that end up in jail having committed violent crimes.
yes,
Very often they're highly traumatized kids with
yes,
no response flexibility. There's no
yes.
conscious choice. They just react, you know.
Yes, yes, yes. The third one is very fascinating. It's a shame-based view of the self. And the reason
Yeah.
I find it fascinating is because of the narcissistic element where the shame, the lack of any integrity of self, can easily convert to a puffery of self, as you write, and it can become a shameless narcissism. And we look at the narcissist going, wow, he has such a, or she has such a healthy sense of self-worth. But underneath, there's this shame-based view of self.
Yeah. I mean, so the shame-based you can show up in two ways, as you're implying. One is you just feel ashamed of yourself. So you're always apologizing for your existence. Everything is always your fault. When you make a mistake, you feel terrible.
Right.
We all make mistakes and we all want to learn from them, but to feel ashamed about it, like I'm just not a good enough, not a worthy human being.
Yes.
No, that happens because children see themselves the way they're seen by the adult world. When the adult world is hurtful or not available, the child develops the sense that I'm just not worthy. So then, you try and prove your worth through being attractive or being smart or being pleasant and pleasing and helpful and so that we always trying to compensate for this shame that we have about ourselves. Now, on the other hand, some people are so badly traumatized that the shame is so unbearable, they can't even feel the shame consciously, but you see it in every action because they're grandiose and they're full of puffery and self-aggrandizement, and they can never admit their mistake, and they have to be constantly aggressive, and they actually can't believe that they ever lose. So that imagine a person who actually loses an election, but they can't believe that they lost the election
Right.
because
Then they,
the,
right.
because they no, this man's father actually was described by his psychologist niece, granddaughter, as
Mhm.
a sociopath, and the
Mhm.
worst thing he could ever say was that you're a loser.
Right.
And so the very idea of loss is just unbearable for somebody who's grandiose and narcissistic, so they can never admit it. And
Yes.
so now then they're seen as successful, and very often these are the characters who lead corporations or
100%.
or are successful in politics, and people believe that they're full of confident and resilient on the surface.
Right.
And it's part of the toxicity of our culture
Right.
that these people can succeed.
Right. I was just going to say this is the toxic masculinity where healthy masculinity is to prosper, to provide, to protect, to
Yeah,
innovate, beautiful parts of masculinity. But
yeah,
the toxic part is when you have to win at all costs. At
that's right.
all costs, that part is the toxic part.
Yeah,
And we see it in our leaders of the world today, our corporations, especially, where it's no consequence is of any consequence to them.
that's
None.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. Including the destruction of the
Of
earth.
the earth. Yes. I mean, it's just okay. The next one is distorts our view of the world. So this leads to a
Yeah,
tremendous distortion because you have a distorted sense of self.
that's right. Um, about toxic masculinity, I was very interested. I was on Joe Rogan's podcast a few
I
months
saw,
ago,
I saw.
and here's a guy who was completely into toxic masculinity. He was a martial arts expert, Taekwondo, I think, and he hated the idea of losing. And he's I mean, he's much softer now than he used to be, and he says he feels much more himself.
Mhm.
Not that he's no longer identified with that Superman. No, he's still very manly, and it's like he works out, and he's
Right,
he's like a incredibly fit person, but he no longer identifies with that toxic, harsh, aggressive, competitive. He's much more willing to be vulnerable openly, and you see the same thing in veterans. or policemen, whose toxic masculinity is kind of um, encouraged by their training, and then they suffer PTSD, and then
Yeah.
they realize just how vulnerable they really are, and they
Yeah.
embrace their vulnerability,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that it's very interesting to talk to them. Now, what was the next point? Sorry.
Yeah. So then now I have another point. So I also, in my book, A Radical Awakening, talk about femininity and healthy femininity.
Yeah,
And then we also have been trained as women
yeah,
toxic femininity, where
yeah,
we lose ourselves, and you talk about it in the book. And one of the doctors, Dr. Lydia Tomashak, she
yeah,
talks about the type C personality,
yeah,
where it's this very pleasing, very self-sacrificing, the toxic feminine that I talk
yeah,
about,
yeah,
very compliant woman who is, or personality that is most prone to big diseases and
yeah, exactly.
cancer, autoimmune. Do you
Yeah.
see that? You've seen that in your own practice, right? The women who go to no length to give care, they're the ones who suffer all these suppressed emotions.
Well, this is I have a chapter called Society Shock Absorbers.
Yeah.
And during COVID, there was an article in the New York Times about how women were absorbing the stresses of their families and their spouses, and they felt guilty if they couldn't relieve the stresses of their families. They took it all upon themselves. This is why, again, women have 70 or 80% of autoimmune diseases, because
Yeah.
these are the people that autoimmune disease happens to. Now, Lydia Timoshek, by the way, she she did point out, as I point out, that these traits are not inborn; they are programmed. Therefore, they can be unprogrammed. So,
Yes.
so part of healing is for people to unprogram themselves from
Yes.
these. This is nobody's first nature. It's everybody's second nature.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that
It's
means,
the false self that we create to cope. In my book, The Parenting Map, I talk about how sad it is that we even have this
yeah,
inner child that
yeah.
hasn't been seen and thinks it's unworthy. Worth is part of our blueprint. We shouldn't even be questioning it. So the next point is talk more about how this
The worldview.
the worldview, yeah, shapes our worldview.
Yeah. So in the collection of the sayings of the Buddha, the Dhammapada, the first statement is that basically everything is thought in the lead. In other words, we see the world through our thoughts, basically through our beliefs. And I would say not just our conscious thoughts, but our unconscious beliefs, we create the world. So
Yes.
if I had an experience with ketamine, a healing session with ketamine a few years ago. And during the session, I screamed out, I hate the world,
Mm,
you know, and that goes back to my infancy
mhm.
because of the circumstances of my own particular infancy. I saw the world as hostile and unpleasant,
Yes.
and I just didn't like it, So that shapes my view of the world unconsciously,
Mhm.
you know. And so the Buddha is quite right. With our thoughts, with our beliefs, we create the world. Because if I see the world that way, I'm going to behave in certain ways, you know, and until I learn better. Now, what the Buddha didn't say, and this is modern psychology, is that before with our minds we create the world creates our minds.
Right, right.
So what happens to us in infancy
Mm,
will very much shape the way we see the world.
mhm.
If I see the world as fundamentally good and with the potential for good, and a world
Safe,
a world in which I can feel safe, I relate to the universe very differently than if I see
very
the
different.
world as hostile. So with that trauma-based view, I'm going to see a distorted view of the world.
Yeah.
You know,
Gabor, my awakening, in my book, A Radical Awakening, really was kind of the opposite. I
yeah,
grew up with so much safety in my little microcosm of my parents, and my mother is
mm,
amazing.
mm,
Um, that I didn't realize that there was anything to be afraid of. So I
mm,
was very protected and very safe, very loved, and felt worthy. So when I began meeting toxic people,
yeah,
right, I didn't meet tigers. If I met a tiger, I would run. That I have
yeah,
the gut instinct for.
yeah,
But but the wolf in sheep's clothing for me were human beings. I couldn't fathom that there was toxicity and mental illness. So it took me my trauma, it was an inverted response, but it was equally traumatized because I was like so numb and naive to the possibility that people could be, whereas very traumatized people typically become alert, become defensive. They think the world is an unsafe place from childbirth. So
Yeah.
they're very defended. I had no defense. And I see now how in this toxic world, that was traumatizing as well. And I had to create defenses. I say to my friends, oh, I'm so happy I'm paranoid now. I have paranoia. I never had a even healthy paranoia. So, but that's because the culture is so abnormal. I wasn't abnormal. My childhood was amazing, but I had to develop ego defenses to protect my innocence. I was very innocently trusting. So I had to learn other things
Well,
that,
do you know something? I'll give you my comment on that if I may.
yes,
That sounds like a beautiful story, but I think there's something missing in it, if I may say.
yeah.
Are you open to hearing that?
Sure.
Okay. Because infants are born with their gut feelings, like I said. So something happened because when there's conditions of safety, we actually get to know what is safe and what isn't. Now, if you didn't know what wasn't safe, I'd say that there's something that happened.
Right. And what happened to me was the conditioning of a good girl. So
Okay, there
those,
you go.
yeah, 100%. I write about it in my book, my mask of the culture in India when you
Yeah.
grow up. So my microcosm is what I'm talking about. Was my mother-child bond was safe, but
Well,
the
wait now.
culture.
Well,
Yeah,
let me just ask you a question. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but as a child, did you ever feel sad or upset or lonely?
sure.
Who did you speak to?
My mom, and she
Did
soothed.
you? Did you?
Yeah. Yes.
Regularly? And how was that received?
I mean, really, my mother is empathic, attuned,
Okay.
beautiful, but she had the conditioning of an Indian woman. So she
Yeah.
would also tell me, it's okay, they didn't mean it. They didn't realize. So that was the overlay.
Okay, but that's what I'm talking about. So something must have happened. Because would you tell your daughter that?
I try to, I mean, it's compassion, but not blind compassion, right?
Yeah.
And I had to
Yeah.
learn that discernment.
That's the
Yeah.
whole point. Yeah. So
Yes.
I think there's something, I'm not blaming anybody here, but I think something did happen that sort of disarmed your
Yes.
natural defenses,
Yes. So what we're talking about, let's talk about it. So even though, and I'm using my example freely,
Yeah. Yeah.
even though there is safety and security, there is also the conditioning, no matter what, that seeps through. Even though my individual mother
Yeah.
was giving me that, her
Okay.
cultural conditioning still traumatized me because she
Yeah.
taught me to be the good girl. I tell her all the time, you made me the good girl. And I had to then unravel that. So no matter what, I always tell my parents, there's the parental influence, the one-on-one, but
Yeah.
there's the cultural right
Oh,
there,
that's right.
right
That's right.
there.
That's right. And when I was in family practice, I did have a lot of patients from the subcontinent, and I saw the role that the women played,
Yes.
and it was hard on them,
Yeah.
especially when they came here to North America,
Right.
because at least where they were, they had kind of the support for their role, but here they kind of were submerging themselves, and it was costing them heavily. That was my experience.
Right. It's double jeopardy, I feel like, because so when you're in this trusting environment, your radar for toxicity is a little lower and you don't
Yeah,
realize, wow, the world is so that happened to me.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then I was the epitome of the good girl.
yeah.
So I was taking hook, line, and sinker till my mid-40s. And then I had my
Mm,
radical awakening. But
mm.
let's talk about how trauma alienates us from the present moment.
Yeah, so we mentioned that when we talk about dissociation, like
Yes.
when the present moment is difficult for us, the infant is completely in the present.
Yes.
They're not in the past, they're not in the future.
Mm.
They have no past, unless you believe in past lives.
Yes.
But they have no immediate past. nor do
Yes.
they have any sense of the future. There's
Yes.
no tomorrow. There's
Yes.
no an hour from now. There's only the now.
Mhm.
And that's a natural state to be in. Now, when the now becomes very unpleasant and stressful or threatening or difficult or painful, then we dissociate from the present. And and the older we get, the more past we accumulate and the more future we become aware of. And so that we're always projecting the past into the future and we're never into the present. And
Yeah.
this culture has got so many ways in which it disassociates us from the present. I mean, we talked about the screens, the multitasking, the
Yes.
stress. People have a hard time being in the present moment. And the
Yes.
more traumatized you are, like I have a hard time being in the present, like I always have to find something to be doing or distract myself. I know better than that, but I
Yes.
have a tendency to do that because when
Yes.
I was an infant, the present was so unpleasant.
Yes.
When the present is unpleasant, you don't want to be there. So you disconnect, and that disconnection then continues into your adulthood,
Yes.
which
Yes.
means it's so hard to be, so that even in a relationship, it's hard to be in the present with somebody
Yes.
or with one's own children. It's hard
Yes.
to be in the present with them, even if you want to be,
Yes.
so, and you go to a restaurant these days.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but you used to be able to go to restaurants. It'd be just quiet there,
And
There'd be
talk. Yes.
you'd sit down, you could talk and interact. But now there's this loud noise,
Yes.
music, thumping music, and
Yes.
screens on the walls,
Yes.
like
Yes.
everything to distract you, to keep your mind busy.
Right. And to give the illusion of grandeur and pomp and circumstance, the first thing I ask when I go out with my friends is I want to talk. So can we go
Yeah,
to a quiet place? And I
yeah,
like off the beaten path, quiet mom and pop, or just in my backyard.
yeah,
Because so it's this seeking craving that we talk about so much in our work. So just to be transparent, my ego mask was the people pleaser, the
yeah,
good girl, so I
yeah,
suppressed my emotions. What
yeah.
was your mask all your years? Was it tuning out and distraction?
Well, I did that, but that wasn't my mask so much. That was just my default setting. My mask would have been um, being super smart and like always right
Yes.
and uh, and aggressive. You know, that was my defense. You know,
Yeah. We have the prototypical masculine, feminine masks.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And we play it well. Okay, tell me, what role does temperament have? Because I also see
yeah,
that we come with a basic temperament and then it becomes abducted and marauded and twisted by the cultural conditioning. Like I was always a more sweet kind of kid, like easy to
yeah,
please. And
yeah.
then I became super, you know.
I think some of temperament is actually genetic.
Mhm.
I think there are different degrees of sensitivity that people are born with,
Yes.
and sensitivity from the Latin word sincere, to feel.
Mhm.
Sensitive people feel more. So when
Yes.
good things happen, they feel that more. But when bad things happen, they hurt more.
Yes.
So it's the sensitive people that tend to be the creators, the artists, the intuitives, the healers very often, but they're also the ones who get more traumatized because
100%.
they feel more. So
Mhm.
when you're traumatized and you develop defenses, then
Mhm.
one of the defenses against sensitivity, if it hurts too much, is to harden yourself.
Yes.
So some of the most hardened criminals are amongst the most temporarily sensitive people,
Right.
but they harden themselves because the
Right.
pain was too much. Um, uh, Sensitive people are also the ones to develop. If you're sensitive, then you're going to have more chance to be depressed or to tune out because you're hurting more. So
Yep.
sensitivity, um, on the one hand, leads to more creativity, more intuition, more of a spiritual connection with the world potentially, if the circumstances are right. And if they're wrong, it leads to more dysfunction.
Yes, that has
And
to be harnessed very carefully. And when you have a sensitive child and an ego unconscious parent, that's the when the abduction happens the most, right?
that's
And
right.
I always tell parents, when you have a sensitive kid, you have to treat that kid very carefully because they can pick up 10 times faster than a kid who's less sensitive, you know? And it's fascinating to watch how those sensitive kids give up their sense of self so easily. and they fall prey. Let's talk about just last one. I like to send out a word of caution, because in our talk about being compassionate to traumatized individuals who can be very malfunctioning, who can be very abusive,
Yeah.
I don't want people listening to take on the sword of compassion like we do as healers. I for a long time tried to heal every human being in my life till I realized, oh, I cannot be everyone's therapist. I
Yeah.
am I am not their fixer, their mother.
Yeah.
So how can we help people differentiate when you have to distance, when you have to protect yourself, when you have to refer out?
Well, great question. It goes back to what we said about gut feelings. You have to be in touch with the gut feelings. You can feel compassion for somebody without having anything to do with them because they're toxic for you. And to put in, so you got to be in touch with, so the compassion has to be connected with gut feeling at the same time. Number one. Number two, the compassion has to go both ways.
Yes.
So is it compassionate to myself to be with that person and
Yes.
trying to help them when they're hurting me? No,
Yes.
that's not compassionate to myself. And if you're not compassionate to yourself, you're going to end up exploiting yourself and burning out and
Yes.
all,
Yes.
all that kind of stuff. So gut feeling is important to get connected to, and compassion needs to go both ways. If it
Yes.
only goes out,
Yes.
you're going to create suffering for yourself.
Yes. Yes. My biggest mistake all my life, till I learned, oh, what about me? But I always say now, when I help people, women especially, but all people, fixers or pleasers really, with toxic people, the first question I ask them is, first, let's examine how are you being toxic toward you
Exactly.
by being with them. And they don't see how they are perpetrating themselves. I didn't see it for years. I thought it was my mission to just heal. So on that note, we have been talking with the fascinating, compassionate, humanistic side of this amazing field of psychology, immunology, neurobiology, Dr. Gabor, and he covers it all in this book in such a beautiful, eloquent way. The Myth of Normal. I'm still not fully through it,
Mm.
but it's beautiful, and I recommend it to everyone. Thank you for being with me. Thank you for always sharing your wisdom.
Well, thank you for having me, and I look forward to talking to you soon about your new book.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Take care.